A very warm welcome to our Day's News Hour. I'm Solomon Danye. Thanks for joining me. Ethiopian Government Communications Service says yesterday's airstrike conducted by the National Defense Forces has destroyed the second part of Mesfin Industrial Engineering in Mekelle city. The facility that has been annihilated was used by the TPLF terrorist group for maintaining its military equipment. In its statement issued on Thursday, it also said the National Defense Force, in collaboration with other security forces of the country, has carried out successful offensive attacks on the terrorist group in different fronts. Ethiopia respects the decision of the African Union when it comes to the Sudan situation to continue with a good negotiation between the three riparian countries, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has said. This comes amidst AU's recent decision to suspend Sudan from the Union because of the coup going on in the East African nation. We have more on this story. It is to be recalled that the African Union Peace and Security Council suspended the participation of the Republic of Sudan in all AU activities until the effective establishment of a civilian-led transitional authority, the only way to allow Sudan to exit from its current crisis. Following the decision, questions arising regarding the fate of the good negotiation between Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia, which was facilitated by the African Union. Addressing the concern Thursday while briefing journalists, spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dina Mufti, said Ethiopia respects the decision that comes from the continental organization.
አደራዳሪው አፍሪካ ህብረት ነው ምን ደራደረው ሶስቱ ሀገሮች ነን ድርድር ለማካሄድ እንግዲህ ኢትኒስ ቱ ታንጎ ሶስቱ መኖር አለባቸው ነው አይደል?
It is the African Union that is facilitating the talks. The fate of the negotiation will be determined by the decision from the continental organization. We hope that the organization will come up with a solution soon. And as a member state, we respect the decision of the African Union. That is what we can do.
In a bi-weekly briefing the spokesperson gave on Thursday, activities of the ministry were highlighted. Asked about US's position regarding the sanctions it was threatening to impose on Ethiopia, the spokesperson had this to say.
Whether this sanction is going to be imposed immediately or later on, nobody knows. But it's only the US that knows it. But we believe on our part there is no need, there is no reason, there is no rationale for imposing any sanction on Ethiopia because Ethiopia is doing its level best to address its problem. Number one. This is Ethiopian internal situation. This is Ethiopian internal matter. Ethiopia is taking care of its matters by itself. As a sovereign nation, it's not only USA, everybody else has to observe the sovereignty of the nation. And Ethiopia is entitled to take care of its own problem. And the problem is being taken care of it. And therefore, there is no need, there is no rationale, there is no reason whatsoever to think to impose sanction on Ethiopia.
The US recently issued a statement accusing the TPLF of starting the war in Tigray, which gives hope to the government that the Biden administration has finally understood the situation. Ethiopia should not be preoccupied with the military change in Sudan, although the instability there may have negative implications. Director of the African Institute of Governance and Development at the Ethiopian Civil Service University, Cole Kompok, has made this remark. In his stay with the TV, the scholar also suggests that Ethiopia should intensify its diplomatic endeavor for the peace and stability of neighboring Sudan. Goshamalsu reports.
Following the coup d'etat that has taken place in Sudan, the military wing led by General Abdul Fattah al-Burhan seized power by dissolving the transitional government after troops had arrested Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok. This has resulted in thousands of Sudanese people flooding to the street and strongly protesting the coup. Reflecting on the implications of the Sudan unrest, Director of African Institute of Governance and Development at Ethiopian Civil Service University, Cole Kompok, says Ethiopia should not be preoccupied with the current situation of Sudan, despite the fact that the instability may have negative connotations.
I would say Ethiopia should not be shaken by any military change that happened in the Sudan. Though it might have its negative implications, However, I do believe that Ethiopia would never get around, given its foreign relations within the Africa context and the world at large. Even if there has been a military parade that was conducted, or a joint military parade that was conducted between the Sudan and Egypt, that would not have that much impact. And this is my belief, because though Ethiopia is having its own internal contradiction and challenge, then they can still salvaguard their sovereignty and protect the Grand Renaissance Dam. And that should not stop Ethiopia from running its affairs smoothly.
Chol Kompok suggests that Ethiopia should intensify its diplomatic efforts as part of the peace process in Sudan.
If situation escalated, the first thing that would come into the mind of Ethiopians would be for Sudan at least to settle its house in order. And you cannot just jump into war with some other countries without setting your house in order. And that would be the first priority. While for Sudan working on erecting its own house and correcting the mess, then Ethiopia can still stabilize and work around, all right? And they can still use diplomatic means to, to navigate and see how Sudan could also settle. This is how you can move around, all right? And it would not threaten Ethiopian supremacy.
He has, however, urged African leaders not to allow interest groups interference, keen to twist the situation in Sudan for their advantages.
The issues of the other interest group in what should have happened in Ethiopia and Africa at large, it is something that the Africans need to have an inward looking on how they should resolve their problem without any interference from the outside, all right? And it is something that they have to work toward achieving peace within their own continent without looking upon the Western and the rest of the other interest group to come and destabilize your own countries. I think Africa need to think beyond the horizon.
Chol has also unveiled the presence of foreign interventions behind the Sudan coup.
I cannot point finger on Mr. XYZ who could have been behind. In fact, it has been a tradition, and this is something that most African leaders, plus its populace, should look into what should benefit them first, instead of prioritizing the interests of the foreign, all right? And these are mercenaries who could actually want their own self-interest and prioritize it, all right? And it is something that they should be alert of, and they should be aware of any foreign interference, all right? So I cannot exactly say this is from Mr. XYZ, but there are questions of who should always trigger such coup d'etats in most part of Africa, all right? So I don't name them, but they are still existing.
Chol finally advises African leaders to envision the future and determine their own fate.
It is almost a year now since the TPLF-led mafia group assaulted a federal army base in Mekelle, the capital of Tigray state, provoking the Ethiopian state to take stern measures against it. The treasonous attack was aimed at liquidating a huge army base constituting some 70% of the Ethiopian army. Ethiopia will commemorate the martyr of these heinous attacks, some of which was assisted by prided Ethiopian army chiefs. The eaters like a cat eats its child after giving birth. Soldiers described the situation when approached by media. The Ethiopian soldiers said the betrayal by former comrades was callous. To talk more about the issue, I'm now joined by Zelalem Tefera, a sociologist by profession. Thank you for having you, Mr. Zelalem.
Thank you for having me.
Good. The brutal attack on the Northern Command was none like Ethiopians saw before. this is evidence enough that the TPLF started the war. What are your reflections on that?
Well, the sudden attack of the TPLF on the northern command of Ethiopian army has shocked the Ethiopian society. It has spread a wave of shocks across all social divisions, layers of the society, and it has actually angered most of Ethiopian societies. So that sudden attack was unprecedented. Basically unprecedented because attack on a national army by your own people is unprecedented. And that was the basis of the shock. This has not only violated the constitutional order in the country, but also the moral, the ethical principles of Ethiopian society that has guided it for centuries and millennia. This was basically a violation of existing values. Ethiopian army is there to defend the nation, including themselves who attacked it. So this treacherous act against the army was, which was not actually the rule, but exception. So this has brought about a response from the governments. That response was a law enforcement response. There was nowadays, or immediately, there was a misunderstanding of this issue. As if it was regarded, it was taken by some international media organizations as if a civil war has erupted. It was a group that attacked the defense force, and it was against this that ultimate measure has been taken by the government.
Yeah, you touched on some points about some international media characterizing the war as a civil war. So, but while the TPLF waged war and raided a federal army base, some international media institutions, as you said, assisted by extremist diaspora elements, have made it look like there is a civil war. But it was a government protecting itself from attack by a terrorist organization. So your take on that?
Yeah, basically this organization not only waged a military attack on the Northern Command, but also it was a hybrid warfare. It was assisted, mediated by information warfare. It was mediated by lobby groups who actually sided the belligerent group and who accused the Ethiopian government as if it is actually inflicting heavy damage on its own people. In order to depict it as a civil war, such forms of allegations have been used. The reality, however, is that the government was playing its constitutionally enshrined role to protect the nation, to protect the national army, and to protect the integrity of the nation itself.
Mr. Zelalem Tafara, thank you for your wonderful explanation.
My pleasure.
Have a good day.
Have a good day too.
For 2 years, Sudan had looked to be on the path of democracy, leaving behind decades of violent military dictatorship to become a pocket of stability in the turbulent but strategically important Horn of Africa region. But Monday's military coup has turned that on its head, taking U.S. officials by surprise and sparking fear that a failure of democratic transition there could encourage coups elsewhere and lead to a loss of U.S. influence in the region. Many agree that a coup in Sudan is a reflection of the failure of U.S. policy in that nation. Let's take a look.
For decades now, the political affairs of the Republic of Sudan have been a preoccupation of the U.S. State Department, Pentagon, and the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. Prior to the partition of the country in 2011, Sudan was the largest geographic nation-state in Africa. The country of 50 million was becoming an emerging oil-producing state, maintaining ties with both the West and developing countries. However, international pressure from the U.S. under the administrations of Presidents Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama sought to balkanize and destabilize the country. Since the overthrow of al-Bashir, the monarchies of Saudi Arabia and the UAE have pledged monetary assistance. The U.S. then pressured Hamdok into accords that are at extreme variance with the priorities and needs of the Sudanese people. Hamdok and al-Burhan knelt to U.S. pressure and revoked without any legitimate authority the Israeli Boycott Act of 1958, which prohibits recognition and trade with Tel Aviv. The people of Sudan have also been forced to pay restitution for crimes ostensibly committed during a previous deposed administration. This reckless disregard of the political and economic sovereignty of Sudan could only serve to weaken its national institutions and foment social chaos among the working class, youth, women's organizations, and professional associations. The coup has been condemned by numerous opposition groupings, including the Sudanese Communist Party, which has called for mass resistance against the push. Biden administration maintains same imperialist policy. The current administration of President Joe Biden has paid limited attention to foreign policy. His orientation has been quite similar to that of his predecessors Obama and Trump. Biden has continued and enhanced the hostility towards China, Iran, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, Cuba, Venezuela, among other states. The potential for an international conflict over the strategic control of geopolitical regions could very well erupt in the coming months. The failure of the Biden administration to intervene constructively in the Horn of Africa is fostering greater discord and instability. With the seizure of power by the Sudanese military, this scenario lays focus on the need for a political revolution in the country, along with several others. Despite the promises of monumental economic and security assistance from Washington and Tel Aviv, the Sudanese people continue to be mired in a cycle of declining wages, rising prices, and political uncertainty. It will be up to the workers, youth, women, professional associations, and genuine political parties to build a coalition of popular forces that can secure a victory over the military apparatus and construct a domestic and foreign policy independent of Washington and Wall Street. The intervention of the military in governmental affairs is once again becoming widespread on the African continent. In Chad, Mali, and Guinea, similar developments have taken place. The African Union must address this crisis in order to prevent a further deterioration of the security situation on the continent.
It's now time for Trending. My colleague Haptamo Ashagri has joined me here in the studio to tell us more about the outstanding issues that have been making headlines in the past 24 hours. Thank you for having you, Haptamo.
Thank you very much, Salman.
So what are the top issues that you're going to tell us?
Over the past 24 hours, there are a lot of media houses are released on information related with Sudan coup, especially Al Jazeera, BBC, and CG10 are the main sources that are released information related to this coup. The first one is about the UN security released by Al Jazeera. Then the UN security seriously said that there are a serious problem in Sudan after the coup orchestrated by the military of Sudan, that is Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. There are a lot of issues are also related with this concern. There are a lot of people are also taking threats to oppose the military group, and they are urging those democracies a vital concern for the Sudanese people. And al-Burhan silenced or defeated on those questions weathered by the people of Sudan. The UN security also calls strong measures are needed, but these measures are failed because of a lot of political crisis in Sudan. especially the United Nations Security Council also urged to the concern is a very serious concern. The people need is democracy, but the coup is not respond such kind of questions. Rather, they are hidden. Those Abdullah Hamdok before 2 days. There are a lot of issues are confusing. Why the military groups are doing this? There is question. Even they are fired 6 ambassadors in Khartoum, Sudan, including the US ambassador, the France ambassador, the EU ambassador. All ambassadors are fired by Abdullah. The Sudanese military leader, that is Burhan. These are the main concern why the international community are raising a lot of questions related with this. Even the pro-democracy protesters are asking a lot of issues related with human rights and the right of expression, the right of assembly and demonstration, and so on and so on. But the security forces are fired and hitting those Sudanese who are taking the threats. And the threats concern happened in Sudan.
And the second issue that you are prepared for?
Yeah, that is related with the concern that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia posted recently, that is the ambassador of Ethiopia to Djibouti, Brahanu Tsaggai, meet with UN resident coordinator Djibouti, Eric, conversate on different issues, and they are discussing on how to communicate within Ethiopia and Djibouti, how to communicate within the UN residence coordinator within Djibouti, and so on and so on. They are also discussing how to working together with infrastructure facilities like road projects, about railway projects, power and air transport issues. All issues are discussed within the 2 officials in Djibouti.
Hamtamu Ashagri, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, sir.
ከጨንቻ ወደ ጅማ የሚሄድ ወደ ሀገረ ማርያም የሚሄድ ወደ ሸዋ የሚሄድ ሸዋ ምንለው አዲስ አበባ ነው የሚሄድ ነጋዴ ሁሉ እዚህ መጥቶ ነው እረፍት የሚያደርገው።
Welcome back, you're watching Addis News Hour. An American-based Ethiopian descent journalist, Hermela Aragawi, says TPLF, along with its Western allies, is working to dismantle the social fabric of the Ethiopian people in a prolonged war. Hermela says any negotiation with TPLF rebels will not help to ensure peace either in Tigray or in the rest of the country. Demis McCraw presents the story as follows.
TPLF forces attacked the Northern National Military Base early November, aiming to dismantle the country's government and incite bloodshed and chaos in the country. Following such incidents, the Ethiopian people and government launched a counter-offensive, targeting to enforce law and order and bringing the perpetrators before law. While the government was doing that, TPLF forces and Western allies have been fabricating scores of intentional lies aiming to misrepresent the Ethiopian government effort in the international arena.
And Hermela, first of all, without naming organizations, you maintain that some...
Hermela Regawi, a Tigray-decent U.S.-based journalist, says the Western media is supporting U.S. interest in the case of TPLF rebels in her latest interview with Dale Walters at DC Today's show.
The Tigray People's Liberation Front, they were once rebels during the communist government, and they were backed by the West to come into power for about 27 years, ending in 2018. And it seems that a lot of the Western media is supporting the rebels' narrative because the U.S. wants to support them because that's their way into power. But the majority of the Ethiopian people have said they do not want that group to be in power. They have voted for the current prime minister. So it seems logical that the U.S. should support the wishes of the majority of Ethiopians as opposed to supporting a rebel group that has been fighting the government as well as the Ethiopian people for the last year, and it's been devastating.
Hermela said TPLF has never cared for Tigray people since they assumed power 30 years ago. Mentioning she herself is from Tigray, Hermela underscored that TPLF, along with its Western allies, are working to dismantle the social fabrics of the Ethiopian people.
So I happen to be of the ethnic group that TPLF claims to represent. They originated 40 years ago saying they were going to liberate the Tigrayan people from the communist regime, but they have strayed away from their goal of liberating the Tigrayan people. Tigray is still very much poor. There's not a whole lot that they've done for the very region itself. And it seems to me, I'm actually an outlier among Tigrayans to be able to speak out and say this narrative is not true. The narrative that the West continues to weave is we're so tribalist that we are killing each other because of the ethnicity that we were born into, when in reality it's not true. Many of us are intermarried. Much of my family is from different ethnicities, and also the Western media seems to want to paint the Ethiopian government as this savage government. Most recently with the airstrikes, they were pushing the narrative that they were targeting civilians when in fact they were targeting military armaments within the Tigray region. And so it just seems to be trying to weave that age-old story that Africa is just destined to be in war, destined to have famine. The issue with the famine narrative as well is the Western media has been warning about famine for the last year, but they ignored the very things that could lead to famine, which is that humanitarian aid has been redirected to war. 7 UN officials have been kicked out by the Ethiopian government. 2 UN whistleblowers have backed this idea that rogue UN officials are actually helping arm the rebel group that is fighting the majority of Ethiopians and the Ethiopian government. So it seems to me not a genuine effort to actually help the people, but to actually fuel the very war that has killed tens of thousands and displaced millions at this point.
Hermela says the Ethiopian government has been fighting back the TPLF rebels as any government would do, while insurgents open attack on civilians and military bases. The genocidal claim mentioned by the TPLF group is also baseless, according to Hermela.
Unfortunately, I'm actually so anti-war, but because the armed rebels have continued to move into other regions and so many people have died because of it, it seems like they are not going to give in unless they do give up, and some of the politicians that were not a part of starting this war get to the negotiating table and try to have a diplomatic conversation. But as long as the armed rebels are fighting, so would you stop and negotiate with the insurrectionists? Likely not. You would defeat them militarily, which is what the Ethiopian government is doing. So hopefully that this will come to a close sooner than later.
Hermela is one of the very few individuals who have stood by the truth in the midst of earnest narratives and false propaganda being disseminated against Ethiopia.
The American hybrid war on Ethiopia is said to be the top proxy war of the new Cold War. In an article featured on the Express Tribune, Andrew Korbok says Ethiopia and Pakistan are two countries that appear to have almost nothing to do with one another, but are actually very similar in many ways. Both are either respectively suffering from or have already survived American hybrid wars, he said. So Ethiopia can learn a lot from Pakistan about how to defend itself from these threats. Ethiopia and Pakistan have also a lot more in common than just the American hybrid wars that have suffered from ancient civilizations, diverse societies, geostrategic locations, administrative regions, regional threats, and irresponsible opposition, among others. The TPLF could have played a responsible opposition role before it resorted to terrorism and provoking war, while Pakistan's opposition sometimes deliberately seeks to destabilize the state. It also states how Ethiopia and Pakistan have proven themselves impressively resilient throughout history despite the considerable challenges that they have faced, which speaks to the patriotism and strength of their people.